Hello and welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm Trevor Scott here with my co-host Matt Giraldi.
What's going on, guys? I need to start recording outside too, man. It looks much better than in here.
Yeah, right. And I am still here in Santa Ynez, California. I'll be back in Denver, in the next couple days here. So we're looking forward to getting into quarterback tiers here, though, for this video.
Awesome. Fired up.
So we'll be talking about QB tier 2, and that includes, and we tier it out a little bit tighter than maybe some people do, but that includes Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, and CJ Stroud. So from a Superflex perspective, this is a major decision because you're looking at this probably in the middle to end of the first round here. So, and this tier of players is a little bit interesting because you got one rusher, you have one who's obviously the best real life quarterback, and can kind of elevate everybody else's play, and one who is excellent as a rookie and has definitely the best weapons around him of the three. So this I do really like all three of these players, but this is going to be an interesting tier to break down. And when you're looking at it in your draft, it's going to be difficult to kind of distinguish between these three players. They're all likely to go in the top 15 of a Superflex 10 team draft. 12 teams are obviously going to go a lot earlier, but even in 10 teams, these guys could all end up being first round picks here. So let's get into Lamar first. So from a fantasy football perspective, last year he was QB4. He played in 16 games. You can see a lot of that production came from his rushing. He had 821 yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. Also didn't turn the ball over too much, only seven picks last year. Obviously an MVP season too, because the Ravens were great, number 1 seed in the AFC. But I do think I'll throw it over to you to talk maybe about a little bit of the inconsistency. You owned him last year, so I think you could talk a little bit more intimately about Lamar.
Yeah, it's interesting because I drafted him as my top quarterback in Superflex at the end of the first round. He was the fourth quarterback off the board. He finished QB4, so it's kind of a difficult thing to complain about, if you will. But I think the most frustrating the most frustrating part with Lamar, and I would expect this to get even worse this upcoming year, is the team is so dominant that if they're scoring a couple rushing touchdowns, he doesn't really have to do a whole lot. So I would have some just clunkers of a week where they would win by 2 or 3 scores because, Gus Bus pounded 2 in, maybe he threw 1 touchdown and 120 yards and didn't really have to run a whole lot. So
Defense
given
scored.
his
Yeah.
defense scored, like they're just so dominant. And with the addition of Derrick Henry, I mean, they're just going to pound the ball probably even more. So I know he's got an incredible week to week ceiling when he takes off and runs and scores a couple on the ground, and he can kind of be that league winning guy. But it's going to be tough to when you're setting your lineups. You can't not play Lamar in Superflex. But if they're playing a cupcake
Obviously
team,
not.
like let's say they're playing the Panthers, for example, and you're licking your chops and you think he's going to go off for 30, and then they score twice on the ground and once on defense, then he doesn't have to do anything else. Then that can be very frustrating. So,
Yeah, they're up 21 to
I
0 in the first quarter. They're up 28 to 3 at half, and then he sits the whole fourth quarter.
and it's a weird thing to have to think about. Like, you obviously want pieces of good offenses, but it's almost like when they're too good and they don't need him, it's a little bit scary for me. So I don't think I'm going to be having a whole lot of him this year. He's one of my favorite players. He won the MVP. He's so fun to watch, and like he obviously turns loose more in the postseason, with his legs. But yeah, man,
Is he?
yeah, he was running all over the place.
What about against Kansas City? He didn't run at
Well,
all.
they kind of went away from what was working in the beginning of the
Yeah.
game, and then
Every
they
even
just
his
decided to
teammates, even
throw
his
it him.
teammates, well, even his teammates were like, dude, why aren't you just taking off? Just go. Just
Yeah,
take off,
well,
dude. Do
that
what you
whole
do.
that whole game was weird. It was like they were rolling and they were running the rock, and then they were just like, no, just pocket pass every play.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Mahomes
Just
can't
drop
beat
back
us.
and
Well, sure.
throw it to Flowers, who's gonna fumble on the one.
Yeah, but I don't know, man. I'll let
Anyways,
you kind of dig into your thoughts with him. Just like I said, I can't complain because I drafted him 4 last year and he finished 4, but I don't know. It's kind of a roller coaster with him.
yeah, and the problem isn't necessarily with Lamar himself, right? All the quarterbacks are going to have ebbs and flows. It's just his floor last year was so much lower than you would expect from somebody who's getting drafted here, um, and somebody who has so much upside with his legs. It just feels like he would have a little bit safer floor when you're getting 40, 50 rushing yards out of him every week. But with the passing totals being so low, it's not always necessarily the case. You know, you get those 5 points from rushing, but then you only get 6 or 7 from the passing game, and it's like you end up with 11 points. But from a roster construction standpoint, you need to draft him early. And the problem is in those weeks, if you're going up against a team who drafted, say, Tua in the fifth, or who drafted Brock Purdy in the eighth, and you know those guys end up outscoring your first round pick by quite a bit. You're so far behind the eight ball that
Especially when
it
those
just
guys
makes
drafted AJ Brown and with an
yeah,
earlier
and
pick
or
yeah,
Tyreek
like
Hill or
yeah.
there's Bijan Robinson. Like you get these guys that have these top end players at other positions, and then your top end quarterback doesn't outproduce their eighth round quarterback. It just in those weeks it just makes it so difficult to win. And there's going to be weeks where Lamar has 30 and you're going to win. So it's a double-edged sword. It's just if you end up with a guy like Lamar who is on this great team that kind of holds him back from a fantasy perspective every once in a while, it's a little tough to swallow. But I will say, like, Lamar was great. It's really hard to complain about him when he does win you weeks by himself. And that's why he goes in the first round, and that's why he's third overall in Superflex. Is the weeks he goes off, you don't need a running back. You don't even need that player at all. So you can get 4 out of him and you're fine. So I do really like Lamar. I think the rushing. I think it'll be interesting because I'm hoping that with Derrick Henry that they'll have a weapon in the running game that they haven't had at running back specifically, and that I'm hoping it opens up their offense even a little bit more to be able to um, pass the ball more successfully. And Zay Flowers is going into his second year. Mark Andrews ideally won't get hurt, miss 7 games, right? So like those elements, he won the MVP with a rookie wide receiver without his top tight end. Like if he's able to elevate his passing game back to like his 2019 self when he won the other MVP, we could be looking at the number one quarterback in fantasy here. So I think there were, on top of game script elements, I think there were other things working against him in a way that they won't be this year. So I'm very excited about Lamar. I think that um, I personally think of this tier that right now he's kind of the top of it. I struggle with CJ Stroud. I don't think I'm going to be moving Mahomes ahead of Lamar. I think Lamar is going to stay ahead of Mahomes throughout this whole process. But CJ Stroud is the one where the upside is so tantalizing for me. But right now I have Lamar kind of locked in as the number 3 guy.
Yeah, I wish Baltimore had a bad defense this year, and we can just watch them have to be in a
Yeah, I mean,
shootout every week.
if
That would be
yeah, that's that would elevate him above Jalen Hurts probably if that was the case. But unfortunately, that's not the reality that we're in right now. But yeah, like to highlight just to highlight the player that he is, right? This ranking isn't because of the player or because of his upside, right? It's just there's these other elements that are working against him that in a different situation would elevate him even higher. But he's number 3 right now for me, and I'd be perfectly happy in a team Superflex taking him at the end of the first round, kind of like you did last year. I think that's where he belongs. If you can get him in the early second, that would be even better. So just depends on your draft strategy and how you plan to attack that. If you have picks 7, 8, somewhere back there, and how you plan to attack those 2 picks. If you're going to get in on a quarterback, and Lamar's still there in the first round, it's very tempting just to take him and then get your featured wide receiver or running back in that following round. And that's going to be kind of the case for all of these guys, right? If you're planning on taking a quarterback, it's kind of going to depend on who you want and where you want to strike at quarterback here. So going to the next guy, we got Mahomes. Obviously the best real life quarterback, right? That's not what we're discussing here. We're discussing from a fantasy perspective. We have him at 4. Last year was very disappointing. He was, the top ranked quarterback going into last year. He had a great season the year before, but the weapons just should have been more of a red flag than they were. We kind of just said, he'll figure it out. He's Mahomes. But their defense got a lot better. So they were holding teams down. They didn't need to score quite so much. They didn't have as many explosive plays on offense last year. A lot more at or behind the line of scrimmage. A lot of Rashi Rice's targets were screens or quick hitting passes. So, and it took him a while to get going in the offense. Full 10 weeks before he was really rolling. So they didn't really have a number one wide receiver until that was the case. So, that led to his QB8 ranking last year. And that was tough for anybody who drafted him as QB1 in the first round, because it's just like you don't even have an advantage anymore at that. So anyways, we're going into this next year, right? He's projected as QB3, and his weapons are going to be significantly better. Rice is going to have a major suspension. We'll leave that for a different discussion, but he's going to miss 8 to 10 games. But they drafted Xavier Worthy in the first round, and they brought in Marquise Brown, who is also another very speedy wide receiver who is, at times in his career, demanded 10 targets per game. So I think he can be like the number one feature, and then they have Xavier Worthy to open up the field for everybody else, and they obviously still have Kelsey. So I think that the offense, in terms of weapons for Mahomes, is in a significantly better spot than it was to start last year. So I'm comfortable with him at 4. I do hope to get Mahomes in a league or two, just because he's obviously very dominant and can have that major weekly upside, and he's discounted this year from that. But yeah, what are your thoughts on him?
I'm very excited that Marquez Valdez-Scantling is not a wasted body on the field this year, because yes, he stretched the field. Obviously, he's a good blocker or whatever, but people didn't really have to worry about him actually getting thrown to, because he was just such a bad actual receiver. So when you add in Hollywood Brown, who is a burner, but is also a very good player that can be their number one, obviously alongside Kelsey, but adding Xavier Worthy, where you've got this field stretcher who maybe they throw him a bomb or two a game, but they can get him acclimated into the offense slowly. But that's going to open up a lot of the middle of the field for guys like Kelsey to kind of do his thing too, because the defense is going to have to truly be afraid of these two guys that can really take the top off it. So I'm kind of in on Mahomes this year. Honestly, I'm not 100% sure how much I have him in best ball at this point, but like you said, with the defense, probably taking a step back, I think this will be a good year for him.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. I really hope that he bounces back, and you see these projections down here. He's got 4,280 and 33 touchdowns. Obviously that's nice to project, but it's like the upside from that is so much greater. I mean, we've seen him go over 5,000 yards, and we've seen him go 50 touchdowns. So like, with these better weapons, I think that there's a chance anyways that he really pushes that projection quite a bit higher than that. I would hope anyways to see kind of like 4,500 yards and 40 touchdowns from him. And if he does that, he'll be right in that QB4, QB3 range. And I think that's
And
that's a
importantly
reasonable
too,
expectation for him.
with him having a disappointing season last year, it's not like he was a bad quarterback. Like, he's still the best
No,
quarterback
not at all.
in the
Yeah.
NFL. So it's not like he's like being faded for that reason. I think people kind of got a little bit burned, and like you said, with the defense and the poor weapons. But yeah, this should be a good year for him. And I'm kind of at the point where I've got him number 3, just ahead of Lamar, kind of given the concerns I talked about with Lamar. But yeah, man, I hope they don't win another Super Bowl, but like, we'll see.
Yeah, I know. Another topic of discussion for a different time. Oh man, so let's get into the next quarterback now, CJ Stroud, and this is a guy that I obviously really like. It's the most difficult part of this tier for me, because I want Stroud, and if he's gonna stay 5th and he's gonna fall further, I feel like I'll end up with him in some leagues. But I don't know. I feel like this is going to be one of those guys where it's like, why did you draft Stroud so high? And you're going to have one guy in every league that does it. It's just going to be like, oh, Stroud, he's got all these weapons, he's all set up, he just had an awesome year. Um, and one of your league mates is going to end up pulling the trigger on him way earlier than fifth, and kind of letting him fall into uh, that good part of the draft between Mahomes and Anthony Richardson. So that's more a feeling than anything else. But we'll see how it plays out with him, and that's also why I'm tempted to move him up to third. It's just he's got so many weapons. He's going in with a full off season into his second season. He seems to have an excellent command of the offense. He knows how to run the 2-minute drill, the 4-minute drill. Um, they added Mixon, so their running game should be better. And I don't know. I'm just fired up on Stroud overall. He did finish 11th among quarterback last year, 15 games, so he missed 2 games. Still 4,100 yards and 23 touchdowns. And the big calling card last year, he barely turned the ball over, 5 picks. And in the first half of the year, I think he was 2 picks through his first 8 or 9 games. And from a rookie, that's just a major, major thing that he's not making bad mistakes. He's clearly seeing the field well, and he clearly knows the offense. So it's one of those things where that to me adds confidence that he's not going to fall into this sophomore slump that we see from guys sometimes, because it just seems like the learning curve for him is something that he's already kind of overcome. So, but yeah, so he's going fifth. He's projected for very similar numbers that he put up last year. A few more interceptions, but other than that, pretty much similar numbers. But yeah, what do you got on Stroud?
Yeah, I mean, I love CJ Stroud, man. Like he was my number one QB going into the draft last year, and I had high expectations, but he just went so far and beyond those expectations that just an absolute incredible year. And, like you mentioned, adding Mixon to make the run game more efficient. I think this is a team that's going to pass the ball to set up the run. And we don't think that highly of Mixon, but we know what he can do, and he can keep the chains moving. But the addition of Stephon Diggs is huge. And maybe we'll
Yeah,
do a tier breakdown of all the Houston wide receivers, because that's going to be a hot topic of debate in the offseason. But whether you think Diggs is going to be the number one or whether you think Diggs is going to be the number three doesn't really matter, because they're going to have to guard him, Tank Dell, Nico Collins. They've got a good tight end as well. Um, I just think the sky is the limit. And I think that I'm not ready to put him up to the ranking that you have. I think I'm kind of more still in the Anthony Richardson crowd, but I think he could finish top two very, very easily. And we saw his ability to not only play well in the regular season, but just take over that postseason game against what was a pretty good Cleveland defense, right? Like I think this
yeah,
guy is, I don't,
historically good, and he dropped
yeah,
45 points on them. It was like a track meet. And
yeah,
Tank Dell was hurt. It was just Nico. Nico dropped 192 on him. It was just like, oh my gosh, what is going on here? How is he just so wide open every time?
yeah.
So
And unlike Baltimore, where they have a great defense, like Houston's going to be in a lot of shootouts, and they're going to be playing a lot of games in domes. So
yeah,
get ready, because I think that passing projection of 4,100 yards, I think he's going to shatter that.
yeah, and I think that's kind of just built on a model that pulls from last year, and it's like it's just I don't know. I don't know that I can get behind that. I feel like it's just going to go so much higher than that. I feel like again, he's going to be in that 4,500 yard range, because you look at Mahomes in his season last year, right? They're in that 4,100 yard range, and they're like QB8 and QB11. Like that's not going to get it done to be QB5, despite what their projections are saying.
Mhm.
There's going to be guys that just wildly exceed in terms of passing stats all of these projections. So I think he's going to be one of those guys, and that I think he's going to trend towards that QB5 rank, not towards his numbers, which would suggest that he's going to finish later than that.
I'm just picturing our home league draft where you and I go back to back. You take Stroud and I take Richardson, and it's going to be a long season of talking smack.
Yeah, yeah. And if it wasn't clear, by the way, Matt has Anthony Richardson ranked at 5, one spot ahead of CJ Stroud. So Matt will be getting no CJ Stroud this year. Because if he's going to take Richardson ahead of him, there's just no way that Stroud is going to be available at any point in the draft where he's going to get him. Um, so yeah, so for me, I have Lamar first, then Mahomes, then Stroud. Again, we talked about how significantly that can change. And then we've seen two of these three, right, as the top overall quarterback. Like Lamar did it, Mahomes has done it. So the upside for this group is definitely there to finish as the top overall quarterback. If situations change or improve for any of these quarterbacks in a way that we're not even foreseeing, like these guys can easily push up into that top tier. And then with Stroud, he's the up and comer. He's got everything at his disposal. They added Diggs. He's got 3 elite weapons at receiver. He's got a solid tight end and a good running back to help the running game. So I think that he's just set up for all kinds of success this season. And then Lamar, right? If he elevates his passing game, that's basically what he needs to do to be that number one quarterback. So hopefully we see that out of him in a way that we didn't last year. He only had 3,600 passing yards. So if he does push that up over 4,000, that's a monster ceiling there for him. And Mahomes, best quarterback in the league. So if the team needs him to do more, he will do more, and he will produce for fantasy at a better rate than he did last year. So all these guys, awesome players. All these guys going to probably go in the top 12, maybe the top 15 of your Superflex 10-team drafts. And yeah, so hopefully we helped you out there a little bit. I think Matt has it Mahomes, Lamar, and then actually Richardson and Stroud. So he's got Stroud pushed down a little bit further, but overall we both agree that Lamar and Mahomes are 3 and 4, and those are going to be kind of the one of the two that you should be kind of trending towards in this group.
Could have said it better myself.
All right, and with that, we'll see you guys in the next one.